In the spring of 2021, a woman named Carla Metzger paid $42 for a battered leather trunk at an estate sale outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania. She wanted the trunk. Whatever was inside, she assumed, was junk. The trunk smelled of camphor and age, that particular combination of decay and deliberate preservation, like something had been put inside it and sealed not to be forgotten, but to be protected from something. The leather was cracked along the lid seams. The brass latches had turned the color of a bruise. Inside, beneath a folded linen cloth that dissolved at her touch, she found 23 drawings, charcoal on paper. Some of the paper was thicker, pages torn from a ledger book by the look of it. Some were thin, almost translucent with age. All 23 were sealed in wax paper, each sheet wrapped individually with the kind of care someone reserves for things they know future people will need to see. Carla spread them on her kitchen table. They were scenes of destruction: a barn burning, a bridge mid-collapse, a schoolhouse with smoke pouring from the windows, children running, a figure in a doorway carrying a child, a house on fire, every window alight, and at an upper window, a single silhouetted figure, motionless, watching the flames. And the last one, the 23rd, was different. No fire, no collapse, no disaster in the conventional sense. It was a child's bedroom, a window open, curtains lifting in a wind, an empty bed, nothing else. There was a note tucked inside the linen wrapping. The handwriting was formal, careful, the ink faded to the color of rust. I, Dr. August Renner, physician, residing in Holtz Creek, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, do hereby attest that the drawings enclosed in this chest were made by Eli Walcott, age 9, in the year 1859. Each drawing was made before the event it depicts. I witnessed the drawings before the events occurred. I witnessed the events after. I have not found a single exception in 23 instances. I do not know what Eli was. I do not know where he went. I only know that I looked at these long enough to know that they should not exist, and that the world is not what I was educated to believe it was. I am sealing this chest because I do not know what else to do with the truth. Dr. Renner died in 1901. The trunk passed through 4 generations of his family before ending up at an estate sale. Carla Metzger contacted the Pennsylvania State Archives the following week. They contacted Dr. Helen Marsh, a historian of 19th century Americana at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Marsh spent 8 months authenticating the drawings, the paper, the charcoal, the aging patterns, the wax. When she was done, she published a preliminary report in the journal Historical Anomalies that sent a quiet earthquake through certain academic circles. Her conclusion, stated plainly at the end of 47 pages of rigorous documentation: the drawings are authentic, the records are authentic. The correlation between the drawings and the documented events is, by any reasonable statistical measure, impossible.
This channel exists to investigate mysteries that science has documented but cannot explain. Cases that were sealed, buried, forgotten, not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. Before we go back to 1853 and the beginning of Eli Walcott's story, hit subscribe. We release one deep investigation every week. The archive is growing, and we never run out of buried cases. Next week, we're taking you to Vermont, 1871, a woman who couldn't stop speaking in voices that weren't her own. That investigation is already complete. The question is whether you'll be here when we release it. Drop a comment. What state are you from? Because what happened in Pennsylvania in 1859 left a mark on that county that locals still don't talk about comfortably. Now, let us go back. Holt's Creek, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Population in 1853 was approximately 260 souls. It was a mill town in the way that all mill towns were. The creek dictated everything: where people built, how they lived, whether they prospered. The Walcott family had come to Holt's Creek in 1841 when Thomas Walcott, a quiet, serious man who repaired farm implements and kept ledger books with the precision of someone who trusted numbers because people had disappointed him, purchased 4 acres on the south edge of town and built a house of pale yellow sandstone. Dr. August Renner had been the community's physician for 9 years by the time Eli Walcott was born. He was 41, trained in Philadelphia, deeply skeptical of folk medicine and religious explanations for biological phenomena, and meticulous to a degree his colleagues found exhausting. He documented everything: patient files, weather conditions, the dates of the first and last frost. He was not a man who believed in what he could not measure. That detail will matter. Eli was born in the spring of 1850, the second child of Thomas and Margaret Walcott. The birth was unremarkable. The pregnancy had been unremarkable. Margaret was 27 years old, healthy, calm. Dr. Renner noted in his file that the infant was small but vigorous and that there was nothing of note in the delivery or presentation. He would update that file considerably over the next 9 years.
By every account available to us, Dr. Renner's notes, a letter from Margaret Walcott to her sister in Chester County, and 2 entries in the journal kept by the school teacher, a woman named Harriet Foss, Eli Walcott was not a child who commanded attention. He was quiet, extremely quiet, not withdrawn in the way of unhappy children, but quiet in the way of someone who has decided that listening is more useful than speaking. He had pale gray eyes that adults found disconcerting without being able to say precisely why. His older sister, Clara, was boisterous and social. Eli was not. He began to draw at age 6. This was not unusual. Margaret had given him a stub of charcoal and some paper to keep him occupied one winter afternoon, and he had taken to it naturally. The early drawings were what you would expect from a 6-year-old: people with round heads and stick limbs, horses that looked more like dogs, a rendering of the family cow that made his father laugh. There was nothing to worry about. Not yet. It was a Sunday in late October of 1857 when Margaret Walcott noticed something wrong. Eli had been drawing in the kitchen while she prepared Sunday supper. He was quiet, which was normal. But when she came to check on him, she found him in a state she had never seen. He was seated upright at the table, charcoal in hand, drawing rapidly, more rapidly than she had ever seen him draw, his hand moving across the paper with a kind of automatic urgency that made her stop in the doorway. His eyes were open, but he was not present. Margaret said his name. He did not respond. She said it again, louder. Nothing. She crossed the room and touched his shoulder, and he flinched back into himself all at once, looking at her with confusion, then down at the paper in front of him, as though he had just woken and could not understand how he had come to be in the kitchen. On the paper was a barn. She recognized it immediately. The Oldsworth barn, on the property half a mile north of the Walcott land. Eli had drawn it with unusual detail: the way the boards had warped on the eastern wall, the particular lean of the roof ridge, the fence line around it. And the barn was on fire. Flames poured from the hayloft opening. The sky above it was dark with smoke. "What made you draw this?" Margaret asked. Eli looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "I don't know. I just saw it." 14 days later, on a clear Wednesday morning with no wind and no storm in the area, the Oldsworth barn caught fire and burned to the ground. The warped eastern wall, the leaning roof ridge, the fence line. Thomas Walcott looked at the drawing and said it was a coincidence. Margaret said nothing at all.
She folded the drawing and put it in her Bible between the pages of Revelation. This was drawing number 1. Over the following months, the drawings continued. Not often, once every few weeks, sometimes less, but each time the pattern was the same. Eli would enter the trance-like state without warning. He would draw rapidly, with a precision far beyond his years, completing complex and detailed scenes in minutes. He would return to himself exhausted, sometimes so tired that he fell asleep at the table, his cheek pressed against the still damp charcoal. And when he woke, he rarely spoke about what he had seen. Drawing number 2 came in the spring of 1858. A wagon on the county bridge, the bridge mid-collapse, the central beam breaking, the wagon tilting, the horse in the traces rearing. Specific enough that Thomas Walcott recognized the bridge immediately, the one on the Milford Road, the one with the cracked eastern support that the county had been promising to repair for 2 years. Thomas brought the drawing to the county officer. The officer looked at it, looked at Thomas, and said, "Your boy has a good imagination." 3 weeks later, the bridge collapsed with a loaded grain wagon crossing it. The driver, a man named Gerald Porter, age 52, survived by a margin that his wife later said was grace. The wagon was destroyed. The horse, miraculously, was not badly hurt. Every detail in Eli's drawing matched. The angle of the collapse, the wagon's position on the bridge, the way the horse had reared. Thomas Walcott went back to the county officer. The officer had heard about the bridge. He looked at Thomas for a long time and then said, "Keep the boy away from other people's business." It was around this time, age 9, that Eli came to understand what was happening to him, and he hated it. Harriet Foss, the schoolteacher, wrote about him in her journal in November of 1858. She wrote, "The Aldsworth boy sits apart at recess, not because he is asked to, I think, but because he has learned that sitting apart is safer than being close to people he might one day draw. He is 9 years old, and he moves like someone much older, with a careful deliberateness, as though he has decided that less he touches the world, the less the world will require of him." There is one entry in Dr. Renner's case notes. He had begun keeping a file on Eli by the autumn of 1858, after the bridge incident, that remains one of the most quietly devastating things in the entire collection. Renner had come to the Walcott house on a routine visit. He found Eli in the yard, sitting alone. His sister Clara was playing with 2 neighbor girls at the far end of the property. Eli was watching them from a distance of about 30 feet. Renner sat down beside him. He asked if he wanted to play with the other children. Eli considered this for a moment. Then he said, "What if I draw them?" Renner wrote in his notes, "I did not know what to say to this. The question was not the question of a troubled child seeking sympathy. It was the practical question of a person who has learned to stay away from things he might accidentally destroy." He was 9 years old. By the time Eli Walcott was 9 years old, Dr. Renner had collected and cataloged 23 drawings. He had verified, through his own documentation and through the accounts of witnesses, that every single one had preceded the event it depicted. Not one had failed. Not one had been even partially inaccurate. Let me show you what that means in practice. The 7th drawing in Dr. Renner's collection is, at first glance, the least dramatic of the 23. It shows a large oak tree, tilted, mid-fall, at a section of wooden post and rail fence. The tree's root ball is partially torn from the earth on the right side of the image. The fence beneath it is in the process of being crushed. The angle of the fall is precise, not straight down, but at approximately 40 degrees from vertical, to the northwest. There is no wind in the drawing. The grass at the base of the tree is upright and still. The leaves in the background canopy are not moving. Dr. Renner recorded the date he received the drawing, March 3, 1859. He also recorded Eli's condition when he completed it. Trance state lasting approximately 4 minutes. Child emerged confused and immediately complained of a headache behind his eyes. He slept for nearly 2 hours afterward. Renner studied the drawing carefully.
He could identify the tree. It was the old oak on the southeast boundary of the Hammond property, a tree that had stood for probably 80 years and showed no signs of disease or structural compromise. He brought the drawing to James Hammond and suggested he might want to reinforce the fence in that area. Hammond laughed. That tree had been standing his whole life. It would stand another 100 years. On March 13, 1859, 10 days after Eli drew it, the oak tree fell. The weather that morning was clear and calm. There was no wind. There had been no storm. No decay was found in the root system. No explanation was ever given for why a healthy 80-year-old tree simply fell on a calm Tuesday morning. The angle of the fall, 40 degrees from vertical to the northwest, exactly as drawn. The fence was crushed precisely where Eli had drawn it crushed. Dr. Renner went to see the fallen tree himself. He brought Eli's drawing with him. He stood at the scene for a long time, comparing the drawing to the reality. In his personal diary, not his medical files, but his private diary, the one found in a separate compartment of the trunk, he wrote that night, "I stood in front of that fallen tree for perhaps 20 minutes. I held the drawing up and I looked from it to the tree and back again. The grass is still. In the drawing, the grass is still. He knew there would be no wind. He knew. He is 9 years old and he knew it would fall in calm air on a clear day for no reason at all, and I do not have a single word in my medical education that applies to this. But here is what I need you to understand before we get to the schoolhouse drawing. Something about how these drawings worked, something Dr. Renner documented only in his private diary and never in his official medical notes. Eli hated making them. By the time he was 9, he had learned, through desperate, painful experimentation, that he could not stop the drawings. He had tried. He had hidden the charcoal. He had refused to sit at the table. He had crossed his arms and closed his eyes and willed himself not to move. And what happened every time was that the headaches would begin, a pressure behind his eyes that built over hours into something he described to Dr. Renner in the careful vocabulary of a child as feeling like, "My head is being squeezed from the inside." The nosebleeds would start next, and eventually, in a state that Renner described as not sleep, not wakefulness, but something in between that I have no medical term for, the drawing would happen anyway. The drawings did not ask for his permission. Now, the schoolhouse. Drawing number 14 was made on June 11, 1859. Dr. Renner had begun coming to the Walcott house 3 mornings a week, ostensibly for medical check-ins, actually to be present when the drawings happened. He was present when this one was completed. He described it in his diary. The trance began at approximately 8 in the morning. I was sitting in the Walcott kitchen with my coffee when Eli, who had been eating breakfast, stopped mid-movement with his spoon still in his hand. His eyes went unfocused. His mother reached for him, and I caught her arm. I had learned by this point that touching him in the trance state caused him pain, like waking someone from deep sleep by shouting. I held her back, and we watched. He set down the spoon, he picked up the charcoal he kept on the table, and he drew for 7 minutes with a speed and precision I can only describe as mechanical, as though his hand were a tool being operated by something else.
The drawing showed Holtz Creek's only schoolhouse. Smoke poured from 3 of the 4 windows. Children were in the yard. Renner counted 11 figures in the drawing. Some were running, some were standing and staring. Near the doorway, visible in the heavy smoke, was a figure carrying a child. The carrying figure was an adult woman. The child she carried appeared limp, unconscious, cradled against the woman's chest. Here is what made this drawing different from the others. In the background of the drawing, barely visible through the smoke, was the interior of the schoolhouse. Specifically, a portion of the back wall where Harriet Foss kept a clock. The clock face was visible. The hands pointed to 2:47. Renner brought the drawing to Miss Foss that afternoon. She looked at it for a long time, and then she sat down, very slowly, as though her legs had decided they were done standing. 3 weeks later, July 3, 1859,
A chimney fire spread to the roof of the Holtz Creek schoolhouse during afternoon sessions. Harriet Foss evacuated the children. All 11 who were present that afternoon escaped the building. In her account, signed and witnessed, included in Renner's sealed trunk, she states that as she was doing a final count of the children outside, she realized that one student, a 6-year-old girl named Anna Pruitt, was not present. Foss re-entered the building. She found Anna unconscious near the back wall, overcome by smoke. She carried the child out. She crossed the threshold of the schoolhouse doorway, cradling Anna against her chest. Anna unconscious, Harriet upright, moving through the smoke exactly as Eli had drawn it. Anna Pruitt survived. She recovered fully over the following 2 weeks. She lived to be 81 years old. The clock on the back wall of the schoolhouse, which Harriet Foss later recovered from the ruins, damaged but readable, had stopped when the fire reached it. The hands were frozen at 2:47. Eli had drawn that clock weeks before the fire. A 9-year-old boy in a trance state had drawn, in the background of a disaster scene, a clock face showing the exact minute of the disaster. Dr. Renner's diary entry for July 3, 1859, contains only one sentence. The clock said 2:47. The drawing said 2:47. God help me, I do not know what to do with this. Before we get to drawing number 22, the one that came closest to home, I need to tell you about a man named Edgar Plum. Edgar Plum was the manager of the Holtz Creek grist mill. He was 53 years old, heavy-set, confident in the way of men who have never been seriously wrong about anything they could remember. He had heard, of course, about the Walcott boy and his drawings. He had also heard about the bridge and the schoolhouse. He was not impressed. Children draw things and adults find coincidences, he told anyone who brought it up. It's pattern-seeking. It's what frightened people do. In early August of 1859, Eli drew drawing number 16. It showed the grist mill's water wheel with a cracked main axle, the crack visible in the drawing running diagonally across the axle housing. In the foreground, 2 men were shown thrown to the ground by the force of the wheel's catastrophic failure. One of them, in the drawing, was unmistakably large and heavy-set. Dr. Renner brought the drawing to Plum personally. He showed it to him. He asked him to have the axle housing inspected. Plum looked at the drawing. He looked at Renner, and he said, "I'm not shutting down my mill because a 9-year-old boy had a nightmare." 11 days later, the main axle housing of the Holtz Creek grist mill cracked. The wheel's failure was sudden and violent. 2 workers were thrown from the platform. Both survived, but one, a young man named Thomas Gruel, age 24, broke his arm in 2 places and was unable to work for 3 months. The other suffered a deep laceration across his shoulder that Renner spent an hour closing. Edgar Plum was on the other side of the building when it happened. He was not hurt. Dr. Renner's diary entry for that day does not record Plum's response. It records only Thomas Gruel's arm, the laceration, and then, after a long space on the page, "Eli drew this. I showed him the drawing. He refused to look at it." I want you to put yourself, for a moment, in Dr. August Renner's position. You are 49 years old. You have spent your entire adult life dedicated to empirical observation. You believe in what you can measure. You have documented with your own hand 21 events that have matched 21 drawings with an accuracy that no statistical framework can accommodate. You have held the evidence in your hands. You have been at the scenes. You have seen what Eli Walcott can do. And then, one morning in September of 1859, you watch the boy enter his trance, and you watch him draw your house. Drawing number 22 shows a 2-story house. The house is on fire. Every window on the ground floor is alight. Smoke pours from the eaves. The front gate is open.
the stone path leading to the front door visible between pillars of flame. At the upper right window, the second-floor window, east-facing, a figure stands. It is not moving. It is silhouetted against the fire behind it. The figure's posture is unmistakable, upright, both hands against the glass, looking out. Dr. Renner lived in a 2-story stone house on the East Road out of Holt's Creek. His east-facing upper window looked out over the main road. He slept in the east room. The figure at the window was him. In his diary, Renner wrote about receiving the drawing with the detached clinical language he always used for the other drawings. And then, midway through the entry, the handwriting changes. It becomes smaller. The letters press harder into the page. He wrote, "I know what I have documented. I know what the drawings mean. I know what the 21 preceding drawings have told me about how this works. I know that the figure at the window is standing upright, which means he is alive, which means I am alive in the drawing, which means—" The sentence ends there. In the days that followed, Renner did something that no one before him had done with Eli's drawings. He used one to actively prepare. He removed every lamp from the downstairs rooms and had them placed in the stone outbuilding. He cleared the hearth of its accumulated debris and had the chimney swept twice. He moved every lamp, every flammable textile, every paper document to stone-walled storage. He told his housekeeper, a woman named Ruth Carey, that she was to sleep in her cottage on the property rather than in the house, and that she was not to ask why. He went to sleep each night with his window unlatched and his boots beside the bed. If you were Dr. Renner, if you held drawing number 22 in your hands right now, would you have taken the same precautions? Would you have believed a 9-year-old boy's charcoal sketch enough to move your lamps and clear your hearth and put your boots beside your bed? 3 weeks after Eli made drawing number 22, on the night of October 4th, 1859, a bolt of lightning struck a dead oak tree in the yard beside Dr. Renner's house. The fire spread to the woodshed, from the woodshed to the east wall of the house. By 3 in the morning, the ground floor was fully involved. Dr. Renner woke to the smell of smoke. Because his boots were beside his bed, he was moving within seconds. Because his downstairs had been cleared of fuel, the fire spread more slowly than it would have otherwise. He had time to reach the east window. He had time to push it open. Ruth Carey, watching from her cottage, saw him at the upper window, hands against the glass, face visible, before he climbed out onto the porch roof and dropped to the ground below. She later told Renner that the moment she saw him at the window, silhouetted against the fire behind him, she thought of the drawing. "You looked exactly like it," she told him, "exactly." Renner survived. The house was largely destroyed. His medical files were lost. The sealed trunk containing Eli's drawings had been stored in the stone outbuilding, the same outbuilding where he had moved his documents. The drawings survived because of the drawing. If you received that prediction, if a child showed you the picture of your own house in flames, would you have believed it? Would you have prepared? Or would you have told yourself it was a child's imagination and gone to sleep without your boots?
In November of 1859, Dr. Renner, now living temporarily in a rented room above the dry goods store while his house was rebuilt, wrote a letter to Dr. Wallace Hatch of the Philadelphia College of Physicians. The letter was careful, measured, and clearly written by a man trying to contain his distress within the limits of professional language. He described Eli's condition in clinical terms. He described the trance states, the nosebleeds, the exhaustion. He described the correlation between the drawings and the events. He cited specific dates, specific details, specific witnesses. He did not mention that the boy had drawn his house. Dr. Hatch arrived in Holt's Creek in December of 1859.
He was 62 years old, the senior neurologist at the Philadelphia College, and he had spent 40 years finding rational explanations for irrational phenomena. He came, by his own account, expecting fraud or coincidence. He conducted a 10-day examination of Eli Walcott, his findings preserved in the trunk alongside the drawings. The trance states were genuine and measurable. During them, Eli's pulse slowed dramatically to approximately 40 beats per minute, well below the normal range for a child his age. His eyes remained open but unresponsive to movement, light changes, or sound. His hand temperature during drawing was approximately 4 degrees lower than his ambient body temperature, measured with a clinical thermometer. The drawings themselves showed anatomical knowledge far beyond a 9-year-old's education. Hatch observed Eli draw a partial interior scene during the examination period. The architectural proportions were accurate. The perspective was technically correct. The boy had had no formal art instruction. Dr. Hatch's official report, submitted to the Philadelphia College on January 14, 1860, offered 3 possible explanations and dismissed all 3. Unusual neural activity, possible, but the drawing accuracy could not be explained by any known neurological mechanism. Eidetic memory combined with unconscious pattern synthesis, theoretically plausible, but could not account for events in locations Eli had never visited. Fraud or coaching, ruled out by observed circumstances. His conclusion: the case of Eli Walcott presents phenomena for which I have no adequate explanation within the current frameworks of neurology, physiology, or psychology. I am aware of the implications of this statement, and I do not make it lightly. I recommend further study. The Philadelphia College of Physicians declined to pursue further study. They quietly filed the report and did not respond to Renner's subsequent letters. In Hatch's private correspondence, letters to his wife, found in the Philadelphia College archives in 2019 by a graduate student named Marcus Webb, who was researching 19th-century neurology, there is a letter dated the final night of his stay in Holt's Creek that was never included in any official file. He wrote, "Eleanor, I have spent 40 years explaining away the inexplicable. I have been right every time. I have never before sat across a table from something that looked at me with an old man's eyes in a child's face and made me feel that I was the one who was limited. I watched this boy draw a burning house tonight. I do not know whose house it was. I am leaving tomorrow. I think I would prefer not to find out." There is one more voice we have not heard yet, a woman named Clara Walcott, Eli's older sister. She was 11 years old in the winter of 1859, and she is the only witness to what happened the night of the 23rd drawing. Clara's account exists in the form of a letter she wrote in 1912, when she was 64 years old, to a journalist who had heard rumors of the Walcott case. The letter was in the trunk with the drawings. She wrote, "The last time I saw my brother draw was in December of 1859. He had been quieter than usual for 2 weeks, which was saying something, because Eli was always quiet. He had not eaten well. He sat at the supper table and looked at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. I asked him what was wrong. He said, 'I think it's almost over.' I asked him what he meant. He said, 'The drawings. I think the last one is coming.' He did not seem frightened. He seemed, I have thought about this word for 50 years, resigned, like a person who has agreed to something difficult and is preparing themselves for it. 2 nights later, I heard him in his room after midnight. I got up and went to his door. He was at his small desk, drawing. I watched through the gap in the door, the trance state, his hand moving. When he finished, he sat for a long time without moving. Then he went to bed.
In the morning, I found the drawing on his desk. I knew, looking at it, what it meant. It was his bedroom, his bed, his window, his curtains. The window was open in the drawing. The curtains were blowing in. The bed was empty. Clara continues, "The next morning, I don't know how to say this even now, 50 years later, I went to his room. The window was open. The curtains were blowing. The bed was empty. His clothes were on the chair. His boots were by the door. Whatever he had done, wherever he had gone, he had not dressed to go anywhere. He had simply ceased to be in the room." We searched. The whole county searched. Dr. Renner searched. We never found him. We never found any trace. I have thought about this my whole life. I have never reached a satisfying conclusion, and I have decided that reaching a satisfying conclusion is not what God intended for me in this matter. The only thing I know for certain is this: the drawing was right. It was the last thing he drew, and it was right. Eli Wolcott was 9 years old when he vanished. He had drawn 23 disasters. 23 had come true. The 23rd was his own disappearance. He drew it, and then he was gone.
Dr. Helen Marsh spent 8 months with the drawings before publishing her preliminary report. Her colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania were, by her account, divided between fascination and deep discomfort. 2 of them told me, very kindly, that I was going to damage my career, she said in a 2022 interview. I told them I was 61 years old, and if my career could not survive accurate documentation of authenticated historical material, it probably was not worth preserving. The authentication process established the following. The charcoal is consistent with mid-19th century production. The paper is consistent with ledger paper of the 1850s. The aging patterns are natural and not artificially induced. The wax paper wrappings are consistent with the 1850 to 1870 period. Cross-referencing the drawings with Lancaster County historical records yielded the following. The county bridge collapse is documented in county records from 1858. The Holtz Creek Schoolhouse fire appears in a newspaper record from the Lancaster Examiner dated July 1859. The lightning strike on Renner's property is recorded in a county fire register for October 1859. The grist mill axle failure is documented in the mill's own records, preserved at the Lancaster County Historical Society. In the margin of the entry recording the damage and the cost of repairs, someone has written in handwriting that does not match the mill manager's 4 words. The boy drew this. Modern neuroscientists consulted by Dr. Marsh have proposed several theoretical frameworks. An unusual condition affecting the temporal lobe might produce trance states with elevated sensory processing. Electromagnetic sensitivity, recently documented in a small percentage of the population, could theoretically allow for environmental sensing beyond normal ranges. The physical symptoms, the nosebleeds, the headaches, the suppression effect when Eli resisted, are consistent with what we now understand about stress-induced neurological responses. None of these frameworks explains how a 9-year-old boy in rural Pennsylvania in 1859 drew a clock face showing 2:47 before a fire that stopped that clock at 2:47. Here is what we know, documented and authenticated. 23 drawings, 23 events, every event preceded by its drawing. A clock in a drawing showing 2:47. A clock recovered from fire stopped at 2:47. A doctor's house depicted in flames, that house catching fire exactly as drawn. A child's bedroom, empty, window open, and the next morning, the bedroom empty, the window open. The evidence says that a 9-year-old boy in 1859 Pennsylvania could see events before they happened.
Science says that is not possible. Both statements are documented. Both cannot be true. And yet, here we are. If Eli had drawn your house, if you had held that drawing in your hands and recognized your windows, your gate, your rooms filled with fire, what would you have done with that information? Would you have believed it? Would you have cleared the lamps and put your boots by the bed? Or would you have told yourself it was a child's imagination? If this case unsettles you the way it unsettled Dr. Renner, subscribe. Next week we are in Vermont, 1871, a woman who spoke in other people's voices. That case is already documented. Hit the notification bell so you are here when it drops. Some mysteries refuse simple answers. The curtains were blowing. He knew they would be.